listener production. Hi, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. NRL club Melbourne Storm has come under fire after deciding to wind back its welcome to country ceremonies before games. The club says it wants to focus more on what it describes as action to support First Nations people rather than words. So was it the right call?
If it's a black and white question of should there be acknowledgement or welcome to country at all or not at all, then the answer quite clearly I am in the yes there should be court.
Where is the line between showing respect and being tokenistic? That's coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, time for the headlines with Chris Spiru on Tuesday, December 17.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody. It looks like Syria's ousted president, Bashar al-Assad, has made his first comments since being overthrown. The Syrian presidency Telegram account posted a statement claiming to be penned by the 59-year-old from Moscow late last night, saying he denies he had plans to flee the country. Assad says he remained in the Syrian capital until the early hours of Sunday, the 8th of December, only moving to a Russian airbase some 4 hours north of Damascus as, quote, terrorist forces infiltrated. He claims he was overseeing combat operations from the base until it came under drone attacks from opposition fighters. He maintains it was Moscow, not him, who requested his immediate evacuation to Russia that night.
The former dictator also says in his statement that he left the country once Damascus fell and all military positions had collapsed, and that he still feels a profound sense of belonging to Syria, is filled with hope that the country will one day be free and independent, while maintaining he always acted in the best interests of Syrian citizens in the face of terrorism. Now, this statement has not been independently verified, and he has not made any media appearances since he was granted asylum with his family by Russia. So in the days and weeks now, or week and a bit since the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, people have been combing through the prisons because Syria had quite a notorious prison network, trying to find relatives who have been lost to the system. Some sadly will never be found again, and there's no record of what happened to those people. But it's been really fascinating watching the journalists go over and go on these journeys with locals who have been trying to find family members, loved ones who have disappeared under Assad's regime now that he's gone. So interesting to see this statement come out defending his decision to leave. You know, there was a point made that Syrian forces and police abandoned their posts and that it seemed like quite an easy ride for the rebel forces to get through. So whether you put much stock in what this statement claims, I don't know.
And I know that in his statement, he kind of defended himself and saying, he acted in the best interests in the face of war and all these threats. I mean, we're seeing so many people flow back into the country. If that's not a sign of the brutal regime that, was operating under him, I don't know what is. One of the final political polls of the year shows Anthony Albanese has an uphill battle when it comes to winning a second term as Prime Minister. The Guardian's last Essential survey of 2024 has respondents giving him a 50% disapproval rating, while just shy of 40% approve of his performance. Peter Dutton, on the other hand, has a 44% approval rating and a disapproval score of 41%, Sash.
Meantime, almost half of voters surveyed feel like Australia is on the wrong track and that 2024 was worse than they expected it to be. Now, the federal election is coming up fast and it has to happen by May. So within the next 5 months, we'll be voting. The PM has already made his pitch to voters. He held this almost rally-style campaign, not campaign launch, but sort of campaign launch. Albanese spruiking Labor as the best party to take the country forward. The opposition leader, meantime, I've noticed, has been putting lots of videos up on TikTok. I get a lot of Peter Dutton content on my scroll, a lot. They're obviously populating it into people's algorithms, and he's using those videos to slam the government's performance, but also talk up the coalition as the best for the cost of living.
Yeah, and moving on now, but sticking with politics, the federal government will today unveil its mid-year economic update, promising an additional $83 million in funding for the ABC over the next 2 years. SBS will also receive more cash, with a report out today calling for greater safeguards to protect the independence of our public broadcasters. The government will also reveal it intends to make $14.6 billion in savings from things like aged care and defence reforms, but there will be $8.8 billion in unavoidable new spending.
A Sydney teenager and her mother, two of the 7 tourists who fell ill from suspected alcohol poisoning in Fiji, have landed back in Australia. 56-year-old Tanya Sando and her 19-year-old daughter Georgia Sando Simpson touched down in Sydney last night after they were discharged and cleared for travel. The pair were rushed to hospital on Saturday after drinking cocktails at a bar at the 5-star Warwick Resort on Fiji's Coral Coast.
So when you receive a phone call at it was 11 o'clock the other night, and your daughter says that her daughter and herself have been poisoned and they were in hospital, it's quite something else.
That was Tanya Sando's father, David, speaking on Sky there. Fiji's health ministry at the time said 4 Australians, a US citizen and 2 locals presented with a range of symptoms, including nausea, vomiting and neurological symptoms.
Yeah, it's now understood the 19-year-old Georgia had suffered a seizure after drinking a pina colada. Another mother and daughter, aged 49 and 18 from New South Wales, are believed to be the other 2 Aussies involved. They were in a critical condition but are now stable, according to Fijian authorities. And it is too soon to tell whether methanol was to blame. I know that was a question being asked on the back end of those 2 Australian teenagers dying after consuming, methanol-laced drinks in Laos last month. Authorities say too soon to tell, but the samples of the pina coladas have been sent to experts in Australia for definitive findings.
And Prince Andrew has reportedly been uninvited from the royal family's Christmas at Sandringham as he is engulfed in a spy scandal. So it's been revealed the Duke of York, who is already disgraced over his relationship with sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, was targeted by an alleged Chinese spy. The man, who has been named by Britain's High Court as Yang Tengbo, denies he's a spy, but he has been ejected from the UK.
Yeah, Prince Andrew reportedly became close with the businessman and counted him as a trusted confidant. But there are some concerns that Tengbo was trying to gain sensitive information from the Duke. Prince Andrew's office says he has seized all contact with Tengbo and nothing sensitive was discussed. Despite that, he apparently has opted out of the traditional Sandringham church service with the royal family on Christmas Day because they were concerned his presence would be a distraction, Sash.
Yeah, so this is the event that's attended by the media, and the media lines this walk to the church at Sandringham where the royal family walks through and waves, and it's considered an official royal event. Now, of course, the Duke is no longer a working royal, but yes, it seems that they did not want him present, and it looks like he's going to have lunch with his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson. They still live together. They're going to spend the 25th at Royal Lodge in Windsor, which is, the home they still share. And this scandal has once again called into question Prince Andrew's judgment because obviously we saw what happened in the fallout from the Epstein scandal, and now this relationship with this alleged spy who, again, denies being a spy, but there's all these court cases ongoing into this. So questions remain about Prince Andrew's ability to make important decisions about, who he spends time with.
Yeah, I mean, look, not the best person when it comes to character tests and someone that's really good at reading a person. And I mean, look, this is just the latest thing. Last month, we saw that he was cut off of his £1 million annual allowance from King Charles, allegedly, according to rumours and things like that. It'll be very interesting to see how this shakes up. And I love how he's citing the latest spy scandal as the reason he's not rocking up to formal duties.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us for the headlines. Next up, we are going to have a conversation about welcome to countries when they go from showing respect to being tokenistic.
Hey, Bension here. Melbourne Storm's decision to scale back welcome to country ceremonies has kicked off a renewed debate about how and when big organisations should acknowledge that they operate on Aboriginal land. Welcome to country ceremonies are where a First Nations elder is invited to welcome everyone to their country, while an acknowledgement of country is when anyone states that they live and work on Aboriginal land. It's that second category that you often hear at the opening of speeches, events, and sometimes meetings at work. Melbourne Storm has said they'll host Welcome to Country ceremonies for major events like Indigenous Round and Anzac Day, but review them for other matches. So where is the line that separates showing due respect to members of the oldest living cultures on the planet and tokenistic gestures? Why do we bother to acknowledge country at all? And does doing it distract us from real action that institutions could be taking to fix inequalities between First Nations and non-Indigenous people in this country? Yora Yora man Ian Ham is chair of the First Nations Foundation. Ian, welcome to the briefing. Did Melbourne Storm make the right call?
Oh, that's a big question to start with. I think one of the things that obviously they've been thinking about is have they got the balance right with welcomes to country. I'd have to say the initial announcement and the way it was reported probably was not what they intended or what they meant, because the first reporting of it was Melbourne Storm ditches welcome to country was in fact not the case. And then in their release they want their actions to speak louder than words, as it were, which, if you read the headline about them ditching it, was probably not what they intended, because it looked like their action was ditching welcome to country. In terms of making the right call, it would depend, I guess, on what you view as the right call. Certainly, I think there has been discussion for a while now about when is a full ceremonial welcome to country appropriate, when is an acknowledgement of country appropriate, at what sort and size of event that you're talking about that happens too. So I think there's a few things in play that Melbourne Storm, like it or not, and to probably worst pun ever, they're at the centre of that storm. A little bit of their own making, but I guess it was going to be somebody somewhere that it happened to.
But I'm asking you, what do you think? When is it appropriate to have a welcome to country or an acknowledgement of country?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the event you're talking about. That kind of dictates the scale of what you do in response to the country you're on. So if it was just your average run-of-the-mill home and away game, say for Melbourne Storm, say they're playing, South Sydney, I would have thought that that's an ordinary event, and therefore an acknowledgement of country is appropriate, such as before the game starts, something comes up on the major screens that says we acknowledge we're playing this game on the home of Melbourne Storm, which is on the Wurundjeri lands. We pay our respects to elders past. That's an acknowledgement of country, because if you think about it, they play every second game at home, and it's a home and away, and it goes on and on. A welcome to country is a much more significant ceremony done live by an elder, a person of the particular country that's on. So they're not done, willy-nilly for everything, but they themselves are more significant and therefore should be at more significant events. So if it is in the Indigenous round, quite clearly that's appropriate, maybe for the first home game of the season as a way of kicking off the whole season. And it may be, for example, if Melbourne Storm are hosting finals on their home ground, for example, that might be appropriate then. So I think it depends on the scope of the event. But if your question is distilled into, unfortunately, we live in a world that's very black and white. If it's a black and white question of should there be acknowledgement or welcome to country at all or not at all, then the answer quite clearly, I am in the yes, there should be court. Absolutely. It's important to acknowledge that everything in Australia exists on country that has had a long connection to and been under the care of particular Aboriginal people in particular parts of the country.
On the most basic level, why should we acknowledge country? What's the point?
I think the point of it is adds to the cultural and historical depth of Australia, the continent, that this reflects a long period of human occupation, of human society, the evolution of Homo sapien and people on this continent that commenced 65,000 years ago and has accelerated clearly in the last 250 years. But nonetheless, it invites all people who are citizens of Australia, invites all of us into that long story that we all have skin in the game with this as far back as when the first people arrived. So welcome to country adds to the national narrative of who we are as a people, who we are as a country. To say that that shouldn't be done or it should be cut off or it should be oppressed is really diminishing us as a nation. It's really diminishing us as the Australian people to say that, look, we're small and petty. We're not capable of thinking outside our own immediate past, our own immediate blinkers of who we are as Australians, and certainly provides us no real direction for the future, because it's a basic tenet. How do you know where you're going if you don't know where you're from? If everyone in this country has a buy-in to a culture, a community, a civilization and society that goes back 65,000 years, it gives you a good steer on how you might think about, particularly with the evolution of Australia in the past 250 years, where we might go as a society.
You mentioned Melbourne Storm talking about action over words. They cite promoting positive health, welfare and education programs. They've got a community strategy that prioritises First Nations people, those kinds of things. Do you think that those are more important than a welcome to or acknowledgement of country, or do you think that they should all happen?
Oh, they should all happen. They're equally important. They're not more important or less important. They're equally important. And acknowledgement or welcome to country is as equally as important as those other things. I often get asked in Aboriginal affairs, what's the one thing that you can do to make all the difference? There is no one thing. There is only everything. You have to do everything if you're going to make a difference. And that includes acknowledging the importance of tradition and cultural connection of Aboriginal people, in addition to health programs, education programs, employment opportunities, economic advancement, all of it. That's how you actually make a difference. You can't pick and choose the particular bits and say, if we do this one thing or do these two things and not these other things, it's all going to be great for Aboriginal people. That's not the case. You have to focus on everything.
How would you feel if other sporting organisations or other organisations in general took a similar tack to the Melbourne Storm?
Look, I don't have an issue with it per se. The important part is, as I said, if the question was, should they or should they not, should it be all or nothing? I'm in the all camp. That is, there should be acknowledgement, there should be welcome. It's clearly there. So if other sporting organisations then look at, well, how do we do that in a meaningful way for particular things that we have, then they need to work that through, and they need to work it through with the particular traditional owner group that it pertains to. But as a philosophy, each organisation needs to talk to the traditional owner groups to find out what's the appropriate level of it and way of doing it for our particular circumstance.
Acknowledgement of country in particular has become pretty widespread in many areas of life in Australia. People now do it in, work meetings, for example. Is that tokenistic?
I don't think it's tokenistic, but do I think it's necessary? Probably not in every internal staff meeting. Not because I think it diminishes it, but I think it's a demonstration of people's commitment. But again, it goes to, for me, what's the event that we're doing it at? If it's an internal staff meeting of just an ordinary management meeting once a week, do we need to do it? Probably not. But if it's the once a year annual staff big event get together, we do need to do it because that's an important event. So I guess it comes down to personal preference. My own is that I don't expect every meeting or every event to start with an acknowledgement of country because some of them are quite, small beer, as they say. But I guess it is a demonstration of people's commitment to it, which I'm enormously grateful for and have great admiration for. But by the same token, people don't have to be as earnest about it all day, every day, as perhaps some people acknowledging country every time there's something on might suggest.
Does it feel like in some way this is the least that particularly non-Indigenous people can do? Or on the other hand, does it feel like if there's an acknowledgement of country at the start of every staff meeting, does that give some organisations a pass to not have to do anything else?
I don't think it gives them a pass to not do anything else. Personally, I'd like to see, and it goes to what an organisation does, what they're about. They might have limited capacity to do anything. So if they're at least acknowledging country, that's important in and of itself. It's an important signal of recognition. If anybody thought by doing that they can get out of it doing anything else or feel that they're obligation free to do anything else, particularly when they're in a position to be able to do other things, I think that would be a bad way of how people viewed acknowledging country. But I think equally, though, acknowledgement of country doesn't therefore commit you to have to do other things. It's kind of like you only go as far as you want to, as you're prepared to commit. But those who can do things where they have the opportunity to think about, can we do stuff in addition to this to help support Aboriginal people and help uplift Aboriginal people and give Aboriginal, particularly younger people, a better future than their parents or grandparents had, then of course, in my view, they should do that. But by the same token, I don't think they should feel that by acknowledging a country, they automatically sign up to that. You've got to want to do it. If you're forced to do it, then I'd prefer people not to. But having said that, if people acknowledge country at the beginning of, things, that's always a good sign, because at least there's that, which is better than some of the discussion going around at the moment, which is we should not acknowledge anything Aboriginal, be it country, flags or other things.
I will come to the flags in a second, but the Juru people in Queensland have voted to ban Welcome to Country because they feel it's been commercialised. Has it?
So the Jaru people making that decision is not so much banning it as saying we no longer wish to do it. That's a different to banning it, and if it's their country, they're saying we're not doing it anymore. So I'm sure I have no doubt that acknowledgement of country will still continue up there, but the Jaru people themselves will just not participate in it. And really, acknowledgement of country, anyone can do that, Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal, because you're acknowledging the country you're on. The only ones who can welcome you to country are the traditional owners of the country that you are on. And if the Jaru have decided we no longer wish to participate because we are concerned that the arrangements we have or what's happening in our part of the earth is, in their view, commercialising it or cheapening it, that is quite within their responsibility to make that decision. Perfectly within their rights to be able to decide where their cultural practice takes place.
And as you mentioned, the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, has said that he's going to refuse to stand in front of the Aboriginal flag. He describes standing in front of that as divisive. That's a word that's also been used in relation to Welcome to Country and acknowledgement of country. How do you feel about the current cultural and political moment in relation to this idea of divisiveness and Aboriginal issues?
It's interesting how it's being used to say something I do not agree with and does not conform to my narrow view of a particular thing, in this case Australian identity. Anything outside that narrow view is therefore regarded as divisive. It's not only saying that thing you don't agree with that it's neutral, it's actually saying it is something I have to fight against. I find that deeply concerning, that particularly since the referendum, there has been basically, I guess, a conscious campaign to diminish, demote and disengage Aboriginal people, Aboriginal culture, Aboriginal community from the breadth of the broader Australian community. There are those who I think have read into the result of the referendum that it was a free pass to be able to be blunt about it, to put the blacks back in their box. That's how some people are treating it and have taken it. And I think the word divisive is being used as the pointy end of that. The referendum, as I said, I think there are people who are using that result to really go to places of deep entrenchment and take the view of it's all my way or it's nothing at all. That's a very immature and very concerning approach, I would think, about how particularly a country like Australia, a nation that is built up around a very multidimensional, interwoven interaction of people of great diversity and culture on a daily basis. We cannot afford to be entrenched positions with narrow views of what a real Australian is and what a real Australian isn't. So even the little things like what flags prime ministers or potential prime ministers might stand in front of, that has far, far greater reaching ramifications than I think most people consider.
That was Ian Ham speaking with me there. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. Before you go, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. It's a really easy way you can support us and all we do here at The Briefing. So as sharing our social posts, check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube, search Listener Newsroom. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.